These are clips of people who took OxyContin, a prescription opioid drug, talking about how the medication allowed them to live an improved and normal life, but it shows the before and after them taking the medication.
Physical therapy hopefully will get me strong enough where eventually I won't need to use the drug therapy, but the drug therapy allowed me to do the physical therapy, which in turn lowered my blood pressure and lowered the blood levels.
As a result of incomplete research and misleading promises from manufacturers, the opioid crisis spiraled out of control starting in the early 2000s. Strong prescription painkillers are a necessary risk to aid in the well-being of people with chronic pain or serious conditions like cancer who are near death and actually do need the medication. Having been discovered thousands of years ago and used around the world for the past few centuries, opioids have alleviated so much suffering for people that simply have no other options to take care of their pain. But as technology and medicine rapidly advanced in the 20th century, the medicine became more widely available, stronger, faster, and longer acting. These advancements in medicine, combined with the widespread increased use of the drug, led to a tragic nationwide opioid epidemic that has ruined lives, families, and the reputation of medical institutions and businesses. The opioid epidemic has claimed the lives of nearly 1 million people in the form of overdoses in the United States over the last 20 years. Both directly and indirectly, the crisis has impacted the lives of tens of millions of people in the country and has costed us possibly more than $1 trillion. As early as the 1800s, opioid drugs were prescribed to cancer patients and people of other serious conditions to treat pain in cases where it couldn't otherwise be helped. It was meant to be an exception and a solution to people who had no other options. But starting in the 1990s, a pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma had been producing OxyContin, a brand of oxycodone, which is a form of opioid medication, that was increasingly being prescribed to patients with short-term acute pain. The medical world and patients fell in love with this magical drug that seemed to cure all forms of pain and sent users into euphoria that distracted them from their symptoms. Purdue increased their production as demand ramped up, while pharmacies and doctors were prescribing opioids to more and more people that didn't have cancer and were experiencing any form of pain greater than what was considered mild. Purdue had convinced pharmacies and doctors, essentially the entire medical industry that was relevant to them, that their OxyContin was not addictive. It didn't start out as a noticeable problem since for many years the drug was widely used in somewhat low doses and would last up to 12 hours. But regulations were lacking, and there were inadequate systems in place to manage addiction, as patients could simply say they were continuing to feel pain, and doctors wouldn't say no since they were misled about the risks that overprescribing could have on their patients. The number of people who admitted to using OxyContin for non-medical purposes increased sharply from 400,000 in 1999 to 1.9 million in 2002, and then to 2.8 million in 2003. This rate of increase has only grown, especially recently, but I'll get more into that later. So by the early 2000s, Purdue's advertising of their painkiller being not addictive came into serious question, and the FDA issued a warning letter saying that they had vastly understated the risks of their drug in advertisements and that they did not inform of the serious risks of abuse, including death. This led to doctors becoming more selective in who they would prescribe it to by using alternative medications before turning to the powerful opioids. The story should have ended there. Doctors were misled, people got a little too hooked on Oxy, and the FDA stepped in to call out Purdue on their misbehavior. It should have been a lesson learned, but not enough changed, and unfortunately this was just the beginning. Founded in 1926 by James O. McKinsey from the University of Chicago, McKinsey and Company is a global management consulting firm that provides a wide range of services to businesses, governments, and nonprofit organizations. The firm is well known for recruiting Ivy League students with a wide range of degrees and specialties to provide clients with solutions to complex business problems and improve their performance. The main areas where McKinsey consultants provide advice and support for include strategy, operations, organization, marketing and sales, finance, and technology. It's a privately held company that does not disclose their operations, clients, or how much they get paid. While experiencing a slow in sales, after the country recognized what looked like the start of an opioid crisis, Purdue reached out to McKinsey, arguably the largest and most powerful consulting firm in the world, to hopefully increase sales of their pharmaceuticals. They helped to identify new market opportunities, such as targeting primary care physicians and Medicare beneficiaries. And they also provided guidance on how to overcome obstacles like the FDA which McKinsey was also consulting for. McKinsey did not inform the FDA that they were also consulting for pharmaceutical companies, and they even had a hand in shaping some of the drug policies to make them weaker, even as overdoses were rising. This is an obvious conflict of interest, and it doesn't even stop there. In addition to working with manufacturers like Purdue, McKinsey provided consulting services to distributors and pharmacies, helping them to streamline their operations and increase volume of opioids they distributed, which helped Purdue and them. This contributed to the widespread availability of opioids, making it easier for patients to access these powerful drugs and increase the potential for abuse. This is a seemingly unstoppable combination, consulting for the manufacturers, pharmacies, and distributors, and the agency responsible for regulating these businesses, all at the same time. The consequences of McKinsey's actions in fueling the opioid crisis were devastating and persist to this day, and it led to widespread addiction and overdose deaths that claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in the United States. It hurt not just the individuals, but also their families and even the businesses that they worked at. It led to significant economic costs, as it put a strain on the healthcare system and resulted in lost productivity and reduced economic output. The economic cost of the opioid crisis in the United States has been estimated to be in the hundreds of billions and potentially over $1 trillion. It has also led to real political and legal changes, with investigations and lawsuits being filed against the company for their role in the crisis. And it's raised concerns about corporate accountability and the need for effective regulation in the pharmaceutical industry. McKinsey was found to have been trying to hide and delete documents, emails, and other evidence that might suggest that they were deliberately and aggressively pushing opioid sales through Purdue. Investigators eventually discovered all the evidence that McKinsey was trying to hide and found that they were deliberately and knowingly contributing to the opioid crisis for their profits. They were hit with only a $600 million fine and issued an apology where they only barely claimed responsibility, even after thousands of people had died and billions in taxpayer dollars were used to set up rehabs. Several investigations were launched to look at the role McKinsey had in the opioid crisis, and these included investigations by the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Congress, and the state attorneys general. There was also a lawsuit filed by the state of West Virginia, arguably the most impacted by the crisis, and it sought to hold McKinsey accountable for their actions. However, this was far from enough to fix the opioid epidemic that's still going on today. For years, there have been more daily opioid overdoses than there have been deaths from car accidents. The number of opioid-related deaths has continued to grow and is actually accelerating. Since the start of the crisis, it has only gotten worse as overdose deaths hit new highs year after year. What started out as a problem with overprescribing these drugs has turned into people using cheaper alternatives, sometimes synthetic ones, bought off the streets, with no regulation and significantly higher risk for not only abuse, but overdose, since there isn't the same amount of consistency in the dose, and you might not even know what you're actually getting. There's no denying that the people this has directly affected have at least some responsibility in not abusing these drugs, but there is absolutely a large amount of responsibility on the side of the manufacturers and consultants like Purdue and McKinsey. They are the reason why these substances got introduced to so many people and why so many in the US are getting hooked on these drugs. It's gotten so bad that there are many large underground markets for these drugs on the streets where people will spend the last of their money just to get high again. Over the last few years, synthetic opioids like fentanyl have become widely used both intentionally and unintentionally as a far cheaper opioid that is 50 times stronger than heroin, so it requires a much smaller amount to achieve the same effect, and that's why dealers will use fentanyl instead of what people think is a higher quality opioid so they can make more profit. The nationwide addiction to these drugs has cost the country over $1 trillion when adding everything up from deaths to loss of business and productivity, healthcare costs, and rehabilitation programs set up by the government and funded by taxpayers. In 2017, the opioid crisis was declared a national public health emergency, and there's been lots of conversation around how we might go about solving it. There are very different opinions on what actions should be taken to deal with the opioid crisis. Some believe that we should stop prescribing it and criminalize the sale and use of it entirely, but this isn't too popular of an opinion, though some do believe it. But most do at least acknowledge that many people legitimately need opioids as it's prescribed for chronic pain in conditions such as cancer and other serious cases. More regulation and restrictions on the distribution of prescription opioids is a commonly proposed plan which would help prevent the number of new cases of opioid abuse, and fewer people would be exposed to the addictive properties of the medicine and be less likely to turn to harmful recreational versions, purchased on the street. There are people working to make naloxone more accessible, which is a medication that reverses the effects of opioids and can even prevent overdoses. Some even believe that the best strategy is to decriminalize all drugs and have facilities set up that can allow people to safely use these drugs and slowly get off of them. One of the arguments behind this idea is that by treating it like a crime and punishing people who use the drugs, rather than looking at it like a mental illness, then people are far less likely to go and seek help and fall further into their addiction, where they're more likely to suffer an overdose, whether it's through increased tolerance or by unknowingly using synthetic opioids that are extremely powerful and can easily lead to an overdose. It's hard to know if McKinsey could have foreseen something like this happening. I doubt that's the case, but they certainly did know that what they were doing was actually damaging society and putting money in their pockets. That's how McKinsey was involved in fueling the opioid crisis. If you guys learned something, hit that thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.